Loved ones, this is Management 4234, Intermediate Entrepreneurship. Today, this presentation will be session 26. If we were meeting face-to-face, and I desperately wish that we were, it would be 9 April. That would be our class meeting on the 9th of April. So I'm going to jump into chapter 16, which talks about growth and crises and recovery, that sort of thing, immediately. But I have one thing I want to share with you. I was shopping earlier this morning, and you and I are not living in a post-apocalyptic world. But here's a foodstuff that has an uncommonly long shelf life. I'm going to get closer. These are cream twirls. Yes, it's a delicacy. It's a dessert that you can buy at Walmart. I forgot what I paid, but it's worth it. They taste great, but the thing that I want you to understand is they last forever. They don't need to be packaged. They don't need to be refrigerated. Now, they won't last as long as a McDonald's cheese hamburger. Those things last longer than rocks do. But these things last forever. In fact, I may show you the package again. The freshness date says April of 2120. I'm going to hold it up again so you can see that. The freshness date, it'll be in the lower left corner, April of 2120. What that means is Walmart acknowledges that these things will last for a century, 100 years plus a month, because I'm filming on the 31st of March. So great food, lasts forever, wanted you to know. So let me jump into chapter 16. I've actually put something that will sort of be a framework on the whiteboard. We're not going to obsess about it, but I want to take a moment to share with you what the authors present in the text. Their argument is that any business, any new venture, will go through a variety of stages, and I know that this is a rough cut, that these are course breaking points. But what they're suggesting in the text is they are saying that the startup phase of growth may be from 1 to 5 years. To be sure, some firms launch more quickly, more successfully than others. But their argument is the first stage is startup, and it may last 1 to 5 years. From that point, once it's gotten past the startup hurdle, then it's in an early growth phase, years 6 to 10. That could mean rolling out complementary products. That could mean wrapping services around the existing product line. That could mean taking products to new markets. There are all sorts of things that any firm could do in an early growth phase because it's scaling. It's getting bigger. It's trying to grow its market presence. The next thing they talk about is maturity, years 10 through 15. Now, in a maturity phase, you'd have significant competition, to be sure. And what that means is you'd have to focus on efficiencies. You'd have to just drive down product costs, keep quality high, keep features high, but you have to really, really obsess about operational efficiency, or other people will overtake you. They will push you out of that market segment. And then the last phase they talk about is a stability phase, and they're saying from 15 years out. Now, what that suggests is if we're in a stability phase, there's no more growth. It's a maintenance sort of a thing. Now, we will have to renew product lines and service combinations and things like that, but we're not expanding geographically, we're not attacking new demographics, we're not necessarily breaking new ground with products or services. We just have a significant presence in the market. There are so many companies. Look at the entire domestic airline industry. This is not a criticism, but there's virtually no innovation there. They all fly passenger jets in and out of the same airports with unionized labor. They buy the same jet fuel. They use the same reservation systems. They're simply delivering people place to place. So my point is, it's fair to say we could describe the airline industry as an industry of a lot of stability. The only thing they've been able to accomplish in the last probably 25 years, truly, has been engines that are a bit more fuel efficient. So the argument that the authors make here is that we're going to have these stages of growth, and they're sort of, these are rough cuts, but they're breaking them into these 5-year segments: startup, early growth, maturity, and stability. Now, the reason this has significance to what we're doing today is the theme of this chapter is not stages of growth. The theme of this chapter is to talk about what sort of problems would we face and how do we recover? So literally the chapter talks about growth and crises and recovery. So that's what we're going to jump on right now. We're going to talk about growth-related problems, and there's a fair amount of content here. There really is. So the first thing I want to take out of the text, if my notes are right, it's on page 397. They're talking about problems of scale. One of the things that has the potential to create wealth, not just for the entrepreneur that launched the business, but for lots of other people, is to scale the business up, to get a significant presence in the market, whether the market is national, global, whatever the case may be. So to scale a business up means that you have to fund growth. You have to invest big increments, more people, more inventory, sometimes more facilities, more cash. And if the growth is on a relatively sharp curve, if it's got a real positive slope, it's going to be difficult to do that. You need enormous amounts of capital to literally bring people on board who are competent, to grow inventories, to open more facilities to support this growth. So one of the classic problems in growing is scale. As you try to get bigger, the need for resources is just astronomical, really is. Inevitably, too, there'll be some macro factors. And when I say macro factors, I'm taking it back to economics, and I know that's a scary thought. I have nightmares every time I think about econ. But when I say macro factors, look at changes in interest rates. So many people, me, all of us, use consumer credit. We get mortgages on our homes, we get car loans on our vehicles, we have credit cards or lines of credit or whatever the case may be. Well, if interest rates go up and our income is fixed, that means our discretionary cash goes down. And clearly in a business context, there are a lot of times where if your customers are interest sensitive, if the rates go up, they will defer purchasing. They just say, I simply can't afford to buy right now because I'm not going to pay 13% interest or whatever a market rate happens to be at a moment. So interest rate changes they're volatile, they change frequently, and they can have a crushing impact. And yet, the reason I describe them as macro forces is no matter what business we choose, we have no control at all over interest rates. Another thing that's legitimate that I want to talk to you about that's a macro factor is the role of government. Government oftentimes has policies that some cases target particular industries, in other cases are broader shocks. If we consider right now, remember today is 31 March 2020, and we are all have some various degree of distancing. Social distance, some states are shelter in place, and there are states that are enforcing that in harsh ways. But the point is, the impact has been to shut down businesses and activities in ways I've never seen in my life. And this is all because the government said, okay, to flatten the curve, to keep the cases of COVID-19 from spiraling out of control, we're going to have social distancing, we're going to shut down all large gatherings, and the implications for events, for collegiate sports and professional sports for that matter too, for the entire hospitality industry. Bars and restaurants are literally shut down. So in the travel industry, people aren't flying because of the travel limitations. Cruise ships are just literally breeding grounds for the coronavirus. So there are, right now as I speak to you, I think that there are 10 US flagged passenger ships that are at sea with no port. No one will permit them to come to port and disembark their passengers because they're concerned about the case of coronavirus. So when I say government policy, yes, right now this is having enormous, hugely consequential impacts on our economy, but the government policy often targets an industry. When vaping first became a reality 3 or 4 years ago, the entire notion of vaping, and one company in particular, Juul, were regarded as saviors because the expectation was that adults would stop smoking. They would use these electronic vapors as a substitute. Well, that has happened in meaningful ways. But at the same time, a lot of teenagers, a lot of adolescents look at vaping as being harmless, as if there are no health consequences. And the use of vaping among teenagers has just risen astronomically. And a lot of those kids are doing really dumb stuff, in the sense that they're doing THC, very powerful forms of marijuana, and that's not what Juul or anybody else intended. So these macro factors, they're factors over which we have no control, but the implications to businesses are just stunning, especially early stage businesses that are more vulnerable to shocks. If you think about what happens in your industry, I can't know what your industry is, but oftentimes in your industry there will emerge new competitors. Well, a lot of business is essentially zero sum. For example, in this country, in my view, there's a finite amount of money that consumers are going to spend on carbonated soft drinks. It doesn't matter what PepsiCo and Coke or any of those other people do. The amount of sales of carbonated beverages are flat. So what these companies are doing is you're just competing to take share away from each other. That's zero sum. If Coca-Cola increases its market share by 1%, that came from Pepsi's market share. So there's a finite amount of money that people are going to spend in a given segment, and if there's a new competitor, then that new competitor dilutes the market share and the profitability that everyone would have in that market, because you're vying for precisely the same dollars in precisely the same segment. When we talk about industries, we can't ignore the implications of emerging technology. That is classic in so many ways. Emerging tech has just huge implications because it displaces industries. Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, and when Apple launched the iPhone, there were smartphones. BlackBerry, a Canadian company, RIM, Research in Motion, had a commanding share of the smartphone market, probably 45% or so worldwide. Great units, in fact, they're still in place. A lot of government agencies still use them because all of their texts are encrypted. So a competitor can't grab information, or another government can't grab information simply by intercepting a text message. So my point is that excuse me, oh my goodness, this is Admiral Roddenberry. I must take this. Sir, Kirk here. Yes, sir, I had no idea you were going to call today. Of course I would talk to you, my goodness. I just meant that I'm unprepared. I don't ever report. I do have a couple of things that I could share with you. Let me put the communicator down, and I'll work from memory because I really don't have a choice. Again, I'm unprepared. I wasn't expecting your call, but since we've spoken last, I think I've identified 3 things that seem to be true of these wonderful earthling people whom we call Homo sapien. The first thing that strikes me is individually, they're essentially identical. Same anatomy, same physiology, everything is identical inside, but they tend to bond or gather into groups or clubs or collectives, and there's usually some shared sense of purpose. For example, some of these things are work-related. Like I told you when I first spoke with you about that subspecies called economists. Yes, deeply troubled people, but they band together. Now, Norton told me with a smile on his face that they're not capable of reproducing that particular subspecies. So apparently there won't ever be any young economists. But that's one example. And I found one, it's a social grouping that I see among my students. There's much that I don't know about this, but I've discovered another subspecies. It's populated exclusively by young women. They tend to be relatively small or diminutive. Yes, sir, there's some big mamas on this planet, but these women tend to be relatively small. What I've been able to discern is they wear these oversized garments. It's like a tunic that they wear on their torsos, and it's so big Sir, you know Lieutenant Worf on the Enterprise? Worf could bench press a Buick, and this shirt would be too big for him. So these young women wear these great big shirts. The sleeves are so long that I can't see their hands. I don't know if they wear anything else because their legs just stick out at the bottom. But the shirts all say A.D. Pi. So that's another subspecies. And again, delightful people, but easy to identify. How many? I don't know, sir. They're like ants. They're everywhere. But the subspecies thing is kind of a neat finding. The second thing I would say to you is Norton has given me his ground mobility unit to use while I'm here. He is so kind. He said he has others, and I asked how, and he looked at me and smiled and said, "The faculty are stinking rich." That's what he said. So I've got some time in his ground mobility unit. It is a Foxtrot 150. And I want us to consider this for Starfleet. The cabin is quite spacious. We could get 4 or 5 people inside. There are 4 lockable hatches that permit ingress and egress. It has a big cargo area. We could put drones in there or proton torpedoes. It's very, very capable. It can drive on almost any surface as long as it's not water, liquids of sorts. And it can pull, it can drag non-motorized vehicles behind it. It's really capable. So what I'd like us to do, sir, is I'd like us to consider buying several thousand of these Foxtrot 150s. We could stage them in all the starships, and anytime we had a mission that took us to the surface of a planet, we could simply deploy the Foxtrot 150, and we'd be in a good place. No, there's no onboard armament, but Norton has put several of his blasters in his ground mobility unit. Some of them are short, some of them are long, but he has a lot of blasters in his ground mobility unit. And gosh, the only other thing that I picked up on, and I'm sorry, sir, that I was unprepared for this. The only other thing that I picked up on is humans, they name their machines. They have, I've seen humans with laptop computers which are fairly crude, but they seem to have emotions for them that I would only expect to see in important interpersonal relationships. But everything is named. The ground mobility unit, Foxtrot 150. The device that I'm recording this thing, let me check the camera that I'm using, sir, to film these videos for class. Its name is iPad Min-I. Very fragile. Most of the electronics are very fragile, and I think I understand why. If I understand this correctly, my iPad Min-I and many of their glowing communicators and that sort of thing, they're actually made from an organic material. Humans call it apple. So apparently they take these apples and they fabricate small machines, and when I say frail, sir, these things wouldn't last 7 or 8 seconds on the deck of a starship, but everybody has 10 of them. So I guess this fascination with naming machines and the subspecies that I've discovered, and I think the utility of this Foxtrot 150, I think those are important discoveries. And of course, this will all be in my log and my report later. But sir, I'm glad you called. Thank you. I look forward to our next communication. Kirk out. You do not tell the big boss no. I am so sorry. I would rarely take a call, but when Admiral Roddenberry calls, you pick up your communicator. So I was talking about emerging tech and industries and how disruptive it is. The reason I was moving into that conversation about smartphones is, again, we had smartphones that were incredibly functional and well regarded. I think BlackBerry is an excellent example. But what Apple did is Apple conceptualized the phone not simply as a communication device. That's the world that I live in. But Apple conceptualized the phone as an entertainment device. So you listen to music, you take photographs with it, You obviously watch shows like, well, in my case, Little Women of LA and Project Runway and things like that on my 4-gen flip phone. So when Apple launched the iPhone, BlackBerry went from dominant in the industry to a fraction, maybe 10 or 15% market share. And the other thing that happened that was so incredibly disruptive, all of the Apple smartphones, all smartphones now, have high quality onboard cameras. So there was a robust industry 15 years ago. Konica, Minolta, Sony, Nikon, a lot of companies that had high quality cameras, significant market share all over the world, lots of profitability. And those companies, that entire industry has been devastated because of the fact that your smartphone now has a high quality camera, and you would look at a digital camera and think, why? What purpose would it serve? So when we talk about growth related problems, one of the things that's true of any industry is almost any industry is at risk for emerging tech, new tech, because most new technology is disruptive. If it gets traction in the market, it pushes aside the things that were already there. And you've seen that even in your lifetime. So the next concept that the authors talk about, they talk about management problems. Not problems that are external to your company, not problems that are an artifact of getting bigger, and how do you accomplish that? But they identify 5 or 6 truly significant managerial problems in here that tend to come with that growth. One, the first thing that they talk about, and I'm on 400 in the text. The first thing that they talk about is growth, where the emphasis on profit and not quality. Loved ones, that has happened to the 3 biggest global auto manufacturers in the last 10 years. There are 3 companies that for 10 years or so have been vying for biggest in the world. Biggest in the world in global auto is simply defined as units of production. How many vehicles did you produce and sell worldwide? And worldwide, these 3 companies, General Motors, Toyota, and Volkswagen. So you have a uniquely American company, a pure Japanese company, and a pure German company. So you have these 3 competing markets, don't you? Asia, Europe, and North America. And each of those companies has held the #1 spot for a year or so, where they'll have like 10 million vehicles sold worldwide, and the others will fall below that. But when you pursue growth for the sake of growth, when you're just looking for market share and profitability, there's often a trade-off with quality. Toyota suffered that several years ago. They were manufacturing about 10 million cars a year, and in the United States alone, they were recalling 12 or 14 million a year. And Toyota's CEO eventually apologized. He said that we focused too much on getting bigger and not on getting better. And frankly, it's refreshing to hear someone make that sort of an acknowledgement. So one of the classic problems of growing is, are you getting bigger, but are you sacrificing quality in the process? That's happened with Volkswagen's Dieselgate. That's happened with General Motors with the ignition switch problem. That happened with Toyota with recalls that impacted everything. Prii, whose accelerators went to wide open throttle. Lexi, that had electrical harnesses catching fire. Toyota makes a pickup truck called a Tundra, and they discovered, and this is unfortunate, that if it were sold in parts of the country where there's snow, most states put salt on the roads to melt the snow. And salt is incredibly corrosive, and Toyota was not galvanizing or coating the frame members of their pickup trucks. And they had entire cross members just literally be driving down the road, and it would fall off the truck, and it would take something with it, like your rear suspension or the differential or something like that. So when you grow and you sacrifice quality, if your only objective is profitability and you sacrifice quality, that tends to be indescribably painful when there is a reckoning, when you're held accountable for that. A second thing that's a classic growth problem that's brought about by management, not by anybody else, and that is an enormous, this huge domain of diversification. Diversification, we don't really talk about this. This is not a strategy class. Diversification comes in two forms, related or non-related. If you engage in some sort of related diversification, that suggests that your choices of new entities have some match with what you're doing. You could share the same tech, the same distribution channels, the same customer base, but there are forms of diversification that are related where you share something with the new companies that you acquire. Non-related diversification says that you have nothing in common. If I am a bank, a federally chartered bank, and I buy a waste management company, there's clearly no relationship, nothing common to those two businesses. So diversification tends to take people into domains where they don't have any competency. What if I know a great deal about manufacturing automobiles, and I choose, because I'm the CEO of some company that's quite successful, manufacturing automobiles, and I choose to buy a telecom company. Now I'm competing in an industry where I know nothing. I have no domain competence. So since I know nothing about the industry, how difficult would it be for me to manage that unit successfully? It's virtually impossible. That's one of the problems with diversification, is the fact that when you step outside of those domains where you have competence, you literally don't know what you're doing. But that's a self-inflicted wound. That's management doing that to itself. Another classic management problem is described in the text. We've talked about this because it has huge implications for early stage companies. Inadequate contingency planning. I've talked to you about this before when we've talked about business plans, about this section in a business plan called critical risks and contingencies. My position is that you, the entrepreneur, should identify any event. There could be 7 of them, 20 of them, 2 of them. I have no way of knowing. Any event in your industry, in your domain, that is high probability and high impact. If there's a high likelihood that something will happen, and if it does, it has high impact, then that's a critical risk. And you should, every critical risk you identify, you should develop a contingency plan. I have the simplest one here. I'm filming right now in a classroom on the ground floor of the PCOB. The dean hates that. He wants us to call it the Parker College. Pinky's out. So I'm in the Parker College, room 1104, because I really think I need a whiteboard to teach, because many of you are visual learners, and I think I can teach more effectively if I have a whiteboard. But if there were a closure, if the university said, okay, all the buildings are locked down, I've already arranged for 2 off-site locations where all I need is a quiet room and a whiteboard. And those other companies, one is a bank and one is an industrial concern. And my point is that if I get booted out of here, me and my little iPad Min have 2 other places to go. So all I'm saying to you is I've built in a response. The risk that I face is that the university will literally declare a closure of all buildings on campus. And if they do, I will no longer have access to this. So I've arranged for a couple of other places. But think about that. Think about that in any context. An inadequate contingency plan. What if you have a single vendor to supply anything to you, and that vendor has problems? I know there's a more elegant way of saying this, but you're screwed. So just think about the fundamentals that underpin critical risks. If any event in the normal course of business is high probability and also high impact, it's a critical risk. For every one of those critical risks, you need to develop a contingency plan. How will we respond? What if you have a complete shutdown of your IT system? Please tell me that you have a disaster site where the stuff is 1,500 miles away and every single night is being backed up. Any variation of that. So what events in your business are high probability and high impact? And if anything exists that meets those 2 criteria, it's a critical risk. Build a response for it, or maybe even several responses. Employee turnover. Oh dear. awful lot of companies burn through an awful lot of people, and I don't understand that. Everyone in business acknowledges that human capital is the most critical asset any business has. And yet we treat people poorly. I don't understand that, I really don't. But usually we can discern the causes behind employee turnover, and it's rarely compensation, rarely, it could be. But in most cases, employee turnover is an artifact of environment. I believe, I know the HR people have data, that an awful lot of people leave companies because they cannot tolerate their bosses. I left, I was at Indiana University for 3 years, and before the first semester was over, I was 5 months into that faculty appointment. I said to my wife, I can't stay here, honey. These people are idiots. And I was speaking of the senior administrators, the chancellor and the people at that level of the university. That was my assessment, but I literally began a job search. And when I found out, remember I was young in academia. I wasn't a young man, but that was my first faculty appointment. What I found out is there are bad administrators everywhere. Okay, I get it now. But my point is, why do people leave? Why do you have employee turnover? It's usually not difficult to diagnose the source or reasons behind people leaving. If you can diagnose the source, you can come up with a fix, can't you? So I don't know what an acceptable level of turnover is. I know Southwest Airlines has a turnover that probably 1.5% per year. And when I was in Louisville, and I was close to and familiar with a lot of UPS hub operations, big freight handling facilities, among their package handlers, not among all the other staff, but among the people who literally threw freight, their annual turnover would be 225%. So somewhere between Southwest Airlines and UPS, somewhere there's some optimal level of employee turnover. There will always be people who leave for quality of life reasons. There will always be people who retire. There'll be people who get ill and have to take essentially a medical leave. But what explains employee turnover? Almost always it's your business is creating an environment that makes people unwilling to stay on a long-term basis. Now, topic number 4, bankruptcy. I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but there are 2 forms. It'll only take me a minute, so let me get them on the board. So bankruptcy is a device that's permitted by federal law, and there are 2 paths. The classic definition of bankruptcy, to declare a bank for a bankrupt, has either 2 definitions. One, you cannot meet your obligations as they come due. The other is that your assets, or rather, forgive me, your liabilities exceed your assets. If, for example, I had a $1,000 car and a $7,000 debt on a credit card, my liabilities exceed my assets. I am technically bankrupt. But this thing about not being able to meet obligations as they come due, think about somebody who's heavily invested in real estate. Real estate is illiquid. It cannot be converted to cash quickly. So here's a what if. What if I'm a young man and I inherited a property from family members and the property's worth $500,000, and I get a bill for something unrelated to that. I can't squeeze dollar bills out of that dirt, can I? I have this huge asset. It's free and clear. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to have from an ownership perspective, but it's illiquid. So if I have bills, what if I'm living frivolously? I own this big asset, but that big asset is not easily converted into cash. So two definitions would make you bankrupt. Either you cannot meet your obligations as they come due, or your liabilities exceed your assets. So if, in the context of business, now there are bankruptcy laws for individuals. These two are just chapters of the federal code that deal with bankruptcy law. Chapter 7 talks about bankruptcies in which you liquidate, literally. The trustee, the bankruptcy court's appointed trustee, if you file a petition for bankruptcy under Chapter 7, the trustee takes control of all of your assets, checking accounts, keys to your building, everything, vehicles. The trustee takes control of all of your assets. The trustee, again, is appointed by the bankruptcy courts. So that person's held to very high standards. And she or he would sell all of your assets, convert them into cash, and then pay all of your liabilities. Now, if there's a residual, if there's money left over, you get it. But if there's not a residual, then that means that you get nothing, first of all, and your creditors lose. The people who loaned you money lose, because they don't recover what they had loaned to you. So Chapter 7 is a liquidation. The business goes out of business. That's a forever thing. A Chapter 10 bankruptcy, instead of liquidating all the assets, it's literally called debtor in possession. So let's role play. Let's pretend that you've got a business and you've grown dramatically and you've scaled up and things are really promising, but you've hit a rough patch. And at this moment, whatever this moment is, you simply cannot meet your obligations as they come due. But you think the business has virtue, you think that it should survive and grow and thrive. And what you do then is you submit a petition to the bankruptcy courts under Chapter 10 of that federal code. And there's a specific protocol. And the courts will literally freeze your creditors. They will say, you may not collect money from these people. And if my memory is correct, I've done this when I was practicing as a CPA. If my memory is correct, the debtor presents a plan to the bankruptcy courts within 120 days, within 4 months, and the debtor says, all right, here's how I think I can pay my debts. I would propose to pay all of them, or 75% of them, or whatever the case may be. And so the debtor proposes to the bankruptcy courts what is called a reorganization plan. It is the work product of the debtor. Now, she or he would probably do it with the help of attorneys and accountants and that sort of thing. But the people who decide if that plan is viable or not is a creditors committee. The bankruptcy courts will find that the 7, I think the law says 7 creditors who have the largest unsecured debt to your company. When I say unsecured, if a bank loans you money and you bought a delivery truck with it, that's secured. The bank can repossess the truck and sell it and do whatever it wants to. But think about me. I've sat on creditors committees because I was a CPA firm and we were unsecured. We would render services, send a bill, an invoice to the client, and if we didn't get paid. So my point is that the debtor proposes a reorganization plan. Here's how I think I can work my way out of this. And then the creditors committee approves it. And if the creditors committee approves it, the bankruptcy court says, okay, debtor in possession, keep running the business. And the plan would say, every month I'm going to set aside $1,600. It'll come to the courts and the courts will distribute it to the creditors, whatever the plan provides. But you have to make payments to the courts on a monthly basis. You have to submit a simple report to the courts on a monthly basis. And when the plan has been fulfilled, when you've done what this reorganization plan said you were going to do, the bankruptcy courts essentially, the petition goes away. It's as if nothing ever happened. So if indeed you ever find yourself in this situation where you cannot meet your obligations as they come due, and you don't want to liquidate, you don't want to just sell everything and divvy up whatever cash is left over, you have as an option this Chapter 10 of the Bankruptcy Code, which permits you to continue to operate your business as a debtor in possession. There's a short discussion about turnaround plans in the chapter. I think it's on 405. And what it suggests is somebody would come into your organization and be well compensated, whether they're advisors or whether they become temporary CEOs or something like that. And they would make decisions that are sometimes harsh, sometimes painful, but if survival of the business is the goal, if that's the end game, then they'll come up with a plan that should accomplish that. And who knows? I mean, I have no idea what it could take because I'm talking in the abstract. But the text talks about this turnaround plan, and it says, clearly what you're going to do is you're going to start with a cash flow statement for the next 12 months, but you're going to have a rolling 13-week statement where you update weekly. 13 weeks would be about a quarter at a time. And then sometimes these things even devolve to daily cash flow projections and reports because cash has such criticality to what happens in survival. So again, there's not a lot of insight that I can share about this turnaround plan thing, except to say that typically someone comes in from the outside almost as an interventionist and builds a plan, puts in place a plan where there's this enormous focus on cash flows for the next 12 months, but it's broken down into very discrete goals or objectives, which are sometimes even daily. And if we have a 12-month projection and we break it down to monthly or weekly or daily, and we're hitting those marks, again, the chances of accomplishing what we set out to do are relatively high. I want to talk to you because the authors do in the text on page 406, they talk about loan covenants. I want you to at least understand what loan covenants are and how they impact you in business. A covenant is simply a promise. You know that, you're bright people. And if you borrow money from a bank, if it's anything other than the most simple sort of a car loan, if you're in business, I promise you, as part of your loan agreement with the bank, you'll sign some covenants, some promises that you make. And I've seen these things, and the truth is they're very much like the 10 Commandments, those that are negative, thou shalt not. The loan covenants that I see commonly is it'll say something like, thou shalt not declare any dividends until this loan is paid. Thou shalt not increase officers' salaries more than 5% per year, or whatever the case may be. And something else that takes the form of loan covenants is oftentimes there are performance measures built into your financial statements. The loan covenants may say that you have to maintain a working capital ratio of 1.7, or whatever it says, or sales levels of 250,000 a month, or whatever it says. So my point is, these loan covenants are going to give the lending institution a wedge. When I say a wedge, not that they're driving it between you and the business, but maybe you're calling it a club is better, because you have to meet these covenants. If you don't, you're in default. And if you're in default in a loan, the bank can call it. The bank can send you a certified letter and say in 30 days, the entire sum is due. And we'll be obviously setting off your account and all sorts of things like that. So loan covenants are simply things, operating metrics that you agree to with the lender. You agree to them. They're not force-fed because you get to say, no, I don't want that loan. So loan covenants give a measure of protection to the bank, the lender, and they give achievable targets to you. And if you violate the covenants, the bank can declare default and declare the entire thing due and start seizing assets. But more commonly, the bank will give you a grace period, and it could be 30 days, 60 days, I don't know what it would be, but I've seen them take that form. And this grace period permits you to remedy whatever's wrong. And I've even seen situations where if something happened, if there was some external shock, and it didn't appear that the covenants, that they would be violated on a recurring basis, I've seen lenders and borrowers work out a plan where they simply altered the covenants. So I just want you to understand that most borrowing that takes place between your company and any lending institution will have loan covenants in place. And I want you to understand what the significance of that is. You know, one of the things that they talked about in that turnaround plan, which I should have mentioned earlier, oftentimes in any turnaround plan, what interventionists try to do is they try to slash expenses and maximize inflows of cash. And I understand that. That makes perfect sense to me. But one of the easiest, quickest, and most damaging paths that turnaround people do is to deal with some sort of workforce reduction. Clearly, if you lay off people or fire them or whatever it is that you do, if you reduce your workforce, you diminish the amount of money that's going out in those expenses. But the downside is so damaging because you lose talent and capabilities. You lose people with relationships with vendors and customers and a knowledge of the organization that is so difficult to recover or to rebuild. And yet, most companies do that. Most companies actively say, oh, we got to cut staff or whatever the case may be. That's happening all over the nation right now as we deal with this shock of the lockdown or whatever you want to call it with COVID-19. I'll tell you something that I've seen happen in several situations and it fascinates me. Instead of ripping everybody's lives apart and sending everyone home and overworking the 6 people that remain, what I think what the smart approach is the smart companies will say, okay, people, we love you, we care about you, but we're in a very bad place right now. So what we'd like to propose is we'd like to retain everybody, but we'd like to reduce your salary to 75% of whatever it was before, and or maybe furlough you every week for, every month for a week, or some variation of that. So people still have a predictable inflow, a predictable source of household income. And you still get work done, and when the situation recovers, when you rebound, you have people who feel a stronger loyalty to you than even before, because you could have dumped them, but you didn't. You made a concerted effort to retain them. But by virtue of you, literally asking if everyone would be willing to reduce their compensation, you're in a much, much better place, because you don't purge your company of all these truly talented people that have irreplaceable organizational knowledge. So this notion about workforce reductions, it's often done, it's usually stupid. The better path is to find some way to literally share the pain, I guess. Agree upon some reduced compensation or some rolling furloughs or something like that, but don't dismiss people and destroy their lives and then think that you're just going to be able to grab them all when you come back. So, I'm at the end of my lecture notes for chapter 16. I hope you got enormous benefit out of it. And what that means is I have to ask my attendance question. Did you watch the video? So here's the question. In Captain Kirk's call with Admiral Roddenberry, what organic material is used to make many electronic devices? That's it. Love you. Talk to you soon. I'm actually planning on filming our next class from a remote location, something off campus. It will be an outdoor classroom. And that is weather dependent, but I think I can pull it off. So, love you, look forward to it. Please stay abreast of these presentations and then other responsibilities. So, talk to you soon.